Welcome to Twisted Fairytale.
You see a glass slipper, and you think romance. You picture a girl in a red hood, and you think adventure. But what if I told you the stories you grew up with are hiding something? What if the polished, happy endings were a desperate attempt to cover up a much darker, more brutal truth? A truth that storytellers like Disney, and even the Brothers Grimm themselves, sometimes sanitized, scrubbing away the blood and the horror because the reality was just too much. These weren't just stories. They were warnings. They were reflections of a world so harsh that one of the only ways to teach about its dangers was through tales of unimaginable cruelty. We're about to uncover the gruesome acts of cannibalism, torture, and shocking violence that were systematically erased from your favorite fairy tales. These are the nightmares behind the happily ever afters. These are the stories they didn't want you to know. Section 1, Number 5, Hansel and Gretel, a famine of morality. Let's start our descent with a story that feels almost quaint today. Hansel and Gretel. You know the 1-2 resourceful kids left in the woods outsmart a witch in a candy house. It's a tale of childhood ingenuity. But many scholars believe the original story isn't about outsmarting a fairy tale monster. It's about the very real, very human monster of starvation. The Hansel and Gretel version published by the Brothers Grimm in 1812 is often linked to the Great Famine of the 14th century, a time of horrific suffering in Europe. Widespread crop failures led to starvation, social breakdown, and unspeakable acts of desperation. Child abandonment was a grim reality. This is the world that likely birthed Hansel and Gretel. It isn't fantasy. It's a reflection of historical horror. In the first edition the Grimms collected, it wasn't a wicked stepmother who wanted to abandon the children. It was their own mother and father. Imagine that conversation. The mother tells the father they must lead their children into the woods to die so that they might have enough food to survive. The father resists, but she wears him down until he agrees. Later editions changed the character to a stepmother, a revision many scholars believe the Grimms made because the idea of a biological mother doing this was just too awful a change that betrays the story's terrifying origins. When the children, starving after their breadcrumb trail is eaten by birds, find the gingerbread house, it's not just a whimsical discovery. It's a symbol of life or death temptation. And the witch isn't some generic villain. She personifies the real horrors of the time. She doesn't just want to harm them. She locks Hansel in a cage to fatten him up like livestock. She plans to eat him. Gretel is enslaved, forced to prepare her own brother for the slaughter. The children's final act isn't a clever trick. It's brutal, primal survival. Gretel sees her chance, shoves the witch into the fiery oven, and slams the iron door, listening to what the text calls her dreadful howling. They don't just escape. They commit a horrific act of violence to survive a world that tried to kill them. They return home, not as clever kids, but as traumatized survivors who had to become killers. The story ends with their mother mysteriously dead, almost as if she and the witch were two sides of the same coin both, willing to consume their children to survive. This wasn't just a warning about strangers. It was a terrifying reflection of a time when the greatest danger could come from your own starving family. Section 2, Number 4, Rapunzel, a tower of sexual awakening and brutal punishment. From a story born of famine, we now climb a tower of golden hair and imprisonment. Rapunzel. The version you know, probably from Disney's Tangled, is a romantic adventure about a lost princess with magical hair. But the Brothers Grimm didn't write an adventure story. They wrote a story about teenage pregnancy and the brutal consequences that followed. The setup is similar. A pregnant woman craves a plant called Rapunzel from a sorceress's garden. Her husband gets caught stealing it and must promise their unborn child to the sorceress, Dame Gothel. A baby girl is born, named Rapunzel, and at age 12, just as she's entering puberty, she's locked away in a doorless, stairless tower. This is about controlling her at the very moment her womanhood begins. When a prince learns the famous refrain, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," their meetings are not innocent dates. The prince comes every evening, and they begin a secret, recurring sexual relationship. How is this discovered? In the first Grimm edition, a naive Rapunzel complains to Dame Gothel. "Tell me, Dame Gothel, my clothes are all getting too tight, and they don't fit me anymore." The Grimms later soften this line to her asking why the prince was so much easier to pull up than the witch. Either way, the secret was out. She was pregnant. The sorceress's rage is absolute. She takes a pair of shears and snip, snip, cuts off Rapunzel's famous braids. But it doesn't end there. She casts the pregnant Rapunzel into a desolate wilderness to give birth alone. When the prince returns that evening, Dame Gothel lets down the severed braids. He climbs up, expecting his love, only to find the furious witch. She tells him he'll never see Rapunzel again. In his grief, the prince leaps from the tower. He survives, but falls into thorns that pierce his eyes, blinding him. He doesn't just get a scare. He's permanently maimed. He wanders the land, blind and miserable, surviving on roots and berries. Rapunzel, meanwhile, has given birth to twins in the wilderness. The happy ending only comes years later when he stumbles upon her by chance. Her tears restore his sight. It's a reunion born not of adventure, but of years of brutal suffering, blinding, and exile, all because a young girl explored her sexuality. Section 3. Number 3, Cinderella. A slipper filled with blood. Coming in at number 3 is maybe the most iconic fairy tale of all. Cinderella, the version we love, immortalized by Disney, is a story of kindness, magic, and a dream your heart makes. Forget all of it. The version collected by the Brothers Grimm, titled Aschenputtel, is a story of horrific self-mutilation and vicious revenge. In the Grimm's tale, there's no fairy godmother. Cinderella's wishes are granted by a bird in a hazel tree. She planted on her mother's grave and watered with her tears. The famous slipper wasn't glass, it was gold. The glass slipper actually comes from an earlier, very influential French version by Charles Perrault. The real horror begins when the prince comes looking for the slipper's owner. He arrives at the house, and the first stepsister tries it on. It's too small. Her mother hands her a knife and gives this chilling advice: "Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." And she does. She mutilates her own foot, fools the prince, and he rides off with her. But as they pass the hazel tree, the birds cry out, look back, there's blood on the shoe." The shoe is too small. The true bride is still at home. Horrified, the prince returns. The second stepsister tries the slipper. Her foot is too wide. Again, the mother gives her the knife. "Cut a piece off your heel," she commands. The second daughter hacks a chunk from her heel, forces her bloody foot into the shoe, and again fools the prince. And again, the birds expose the gruesome lie. This is graphic body horror, encouraged by a mother who values status over her own children's well-being. When Cinderella is finally revealed as the true bride, the story doesn't end with a simple wedding. The stepsisters, hoping to gain favor, attend the ceremony. As the procession goes to the church, the birds from the hazel tree descend. They fly at the stepsisters and peck out their eyes. For their wickedness, the story concludes. They were punished with blindness for the rest of their lives. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about brutal, Old Testament-style retribution. A slipper filled with blood and a wedding party of the blind. That's a far cry from the Disney version we know. Section 4. Number 2. Snow White. A mother's cannibalistic envy at number 2. We find a tale so foundational to Disney, it evokes images of singing dwarves and a true love's kiss. Snow White, the 1937 film, is a masterpiece about innocence triumphing over jealousy. But Disney didn't just tone down the original story. They changed the queen's evil entirely. They erased the single most horrifying detail. The queen didn't just want Snow White dead. She wanted to eat her. In the first Grimm edition from 1812, the villain wasn't a stepmother. It was Snow White's own biological mother. The queen wishes for a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. But as this child, her own daughter, only 7 years old in this version, grows up, the queen's love curdles into a murderous, narcissistic rage. When the magic mirror declares Snow White the fairest, the queen summons her huntsman. She doesn't just want Snow White's heart as proof. She commands, "Kill her, and bring me back her lungs and her liver." The text is brutally clear. The wicked woman intended to boil them with salt and eat them. Many scholars see this as a form of ritualistic cannibalism, a belief that by consuming her daughter's organs, she could magically absorb her youth and beauty. The huntsman takes pity on the child, kills a boar instead, and brings its organs to the queen. She, believing she's eating her own daughter, devours them. But her evil doesn't stop. After the mirror reveals Snow White is alive with the 7 dwarfs, the queen tries to kill her 3 more times. First, she laces Snow White's bodice so tightly she suffocates. The dwarves revive her. Second, she uses a poisoned comb. The dwarves save her again. Only on the 3rd try, with the poisoned apple, does she succeed. And the ending? The Disney queen falls off a cliff. The Grimm version is far more sadistic. At Snow White's wedding, the evil queen is invited. There, a pair of iron slippers are heated in a fire until they glow red hot. She is forced to put on the burning shoes and dance until she falls down dead. It is a death of excruciating public torture, as fiery as her own jealousy. Section 5, Number 1, Sleeping Beauty. The nightmare of a princess. We've arrived at our final and most disturbing secret. The number 1 spot goes to Sleeping Beauty. The story is the epitome of fairy tale romance. A cursed princess, 100-year slumber, a kingdom awakened by a true love's kiss. But the story that existed long before the Grimms or Perrault comes from a 1634 collection by an Italian writer, Giambattista Basso. His version, Sun, Moon, and Talia, is not a romance. It is an unflinching tale of sexual assault, attempted infanticide, and cannibalism. In Basso's version, a princess named Talia falls into a deep sleep from a flax splinter. Her devastated father leaves her in their abandoned castle. Much later, a king from a nearby land is hunting and stumbles upon the castle. He finds the beautiful, unconscious Talia. He does not kiss her. The text states that he gathered the first fruits of love. He sexually assaults the comatose princess. Afterwards, he leaves her there and returns to his own kingdom and his own wife. 9 months later, still asleep, Talia gives birth to twins. One day, one of the babies, searching for its mother's breast, sucks on her finger and draws out the poisoned splinter. Talia awakens. She awakens a mother, alone with 2 children she doesn't remember conceiving. Sometime later, the king, the rapist, returns. He's shocked to find Talia awake with his children. But his wife, the queen, becomes suspicious and learns the truth. Her vengeance is monstrous. She sends a messenger to trick Talia into sending the children to court. The queen then orders her cook to kill the toddlers and serve them to the unsuspecting king for dinner. She wants her husband to unknowingly eat his own offspring. The kind-hearted cook, however, substitutes a lamb and hides the children. Next, the queen summons Talia and orders a giant bonfire built to burn her alive. At the last possible moment, the king arrives, discovers his wife's plot, and has her thrown into the fire instead. The story concludes with the king marrying Talia, the victim of his assault, and they live happily ever after. It's a happy ending built on a foundation of rape, attempted murder, and cannibalistic rage. A story so profoundly disturbing that later versions desperately tried to erase its horrific origins. Conclusion and CTA. So, there they are. The bloody slipper, the Cannibal Queen, the violated princess. These tales weren't originally created as the gentle bedtime lullabies we think of them as today. They were oral folk tales, passed down in a world defined by famine, violence, and brutal inequality. They were warnings, reflecting the very real dangers of starvation, ambition, and the abuse of power. Storytellers like the Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault weren't just transcribing old tales. They were editors. They chiseled away some of the darkness, smoothed over the brutality, and presented a more palatable fantasy. But in doing so, they stripped these tales of their original, raw honesty about the world they came from. The originals remind us that sometimes the monster isn't a witch in the woods. Sometimes it's the person you're supposed to trust most. Which of these dark origins shocked you the most? Was it the self-mutilation in Cinderella? Or the cannibal mother in Snow White? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to keep unmasking the dark history behind the stories you thought you knew, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.